Editorial. Ye-a-ahs and ye-a-ahs. Dedicated to our old students. Occultism will never grow monotonous or lack the divinely human touch while we have among us those glorious ones who emit their radiant auras of self-achievement as they promenade the byways of our occult groves. Wherever we turn, we find those ever-present ones who, like rays of sunshine in our troubled lives, breeze in to tell us of their accomplishments. Let me draw a picture for you. Indeed, it is a masterpiece. Poor, weary Mr. Doe, long searching mid the archives of the past, dropping pebble after pebble into the depthless oracles of Greece, hoping against hope that some echo will waft back to him, sits surrounded by his thoughts, Hebrew lexicons and Greek almanacs, seeking to find that which will bring him omnipotence. As he wanders midst those depthless pages which show upon their creased surfaces footprints where bookworms have trod, a voice rises and reverberates upon his dun-colored landscape. Beside him appears a strange creature, mayhap a denizen of some distant plain, Hoboken, New Jersey, whose description we will try to assist you to build in that floating substance between the ears. His name is Solomon J. Weisenheimer, and he holds the international occult talking record, having kept his jaws moving continuously for 92 hours without saying anything. Mr. Weisenheimer is a small man, about 5'1", but what he lacks in size he makes up in conspicuation, for wherever you may look, from the Grand Canyon of Arizona to the National Bridge of Virginia, he was always the largest and most prominent object in sight. It is true that he cannot talk very clearly, having asthma and in-growing diabetes. His glasses are about 1.5 inches thick, for he is nearly blind. His upper plate falls every few moments. He dyes his eyebrows to match his toupee, and his wooden leg always squeaks when he walks. But he is not so bad looking, for he keeps his mange under good control. As he stands beside the struggling Mr. Doe, he is a perfect picture of the vintage of the year 1. "I see you are a student of the occult," says Mr. Weisenheimer. "So am I. I'm one of the original class of Monsieur Whoop. You remember him, of course. He is the famous Slavonian Kabbalist. I studied with him for years and years, and have written several books myself on physical regeneration and kindred subjects. I'm the ex-Grand Master of the mystic Wallapuk Shrine, and if I do say so myself, I don't think there is another person on earth who has come so close to the realization of the mystic. I see things. As I gaze upon you, there's a peculiar greenish-gray aura surrounding you. Oh yes, sir, I'm a seer. I go into trances. It is very wonderful when you get as far advanced as I am." The peculiar greenish haze which was surrounding Mr. Doe was the result of that individual having become petrified with horror for fear that his studies would produce the same effect upon him as it had on Mr. Weisenheimer. The thought flashed through his mind that if that is what occultism did for one man, he would leave it at once and join the First Orthodox Fiji Island Church. Swallowing his innate feelings, Mr. Doe made a graceful departing speech and hurriedly left the scenes of his late labors, leaving Mr. W. to visualize complacently the effect that his overwhelming soul growth had upon Mr. Doe. "My powers simply hypnotized them," murmured Mr. Weisenheimer as he also vanished from the frame of our picture, leaving a refreshing vacuum behind him. Of course, some of our readers may feel that we have not treated this subject with justice, and that we ought to have said a great deal more, but we must ask them to imagine the rest upon the strength of what they have gone through themselves while cloistered with one of these near philosophers. They have their place, however, for utterly unknown to themselves, the old students are the occult comedians and mirth-provokers and are the basis for the laughter of the gods. Students come up to us regularly to qualify themselves in art, philosophy, music, and paternal judgment with the aid of rheumatism and white side whiskers, feeling that a snowy crest or an appearance resembling a spring freshet should deserve consideration, respect, and veneration. A certain class of mystics just love to tell us how many cycles they have studied in this, or how many decades they have immersed themselves in that, having a peculiarly distorted idea that their superiority is based upon the length of time they have expended in a certain work, failing to realize that ages of effort unwisely expended will produce nothing, and that the length of time passed in study has little to do with the position of the soul in the great path. For some have done more in a few hours than some of our oldest students will do in a lifetime. I must explain to you a few types of said occult mirth provokers, whom we could not help but smile if we did not realize what a tragic place they hold, and what a tremendous sorrow that must come to them when they wake and realize how little they really know. The divine egotist is always with us, and the trouble is the egotist seldom, if ever, is himself aware of his traits, but blaming everyone but himself for his troubles, and claiming that others are simple because they do not agree with him. He goes on through life never convinced of the foolishness of his own concepts. It is a tragedy in any line of life, but in spiritual things it is doubly so. But for the good of those whom it may offend, we must show you a few types commonly met with who are their own worst enemies, and who in reality are never as far advanced as the average person that they talk to. For it is the depth of the soul, the true spiritual understanding and practical works, that are the basis of occult mastership, and the real old student is the last of all who could claim that position. It is a hard thing to say, yet it is true and must be said for the protection of others. A large number of people who claim spiritual vision and first-hand knowledge have not got it and never did have. 50% of our so-called clairvoyants would be scared to death if they even saw an elemental, and would run 20 miles from the first superphysical thing that confronted them. But as old students who should be conscious on all these planes, etc., and as nobody else is liable to be able to check them up, they tack on a few of these things for good measure, to the awe of the foolish and the disgust of the initiate. First, I want you to meet Exhibit A, Mrs. Ophelia Wobbletripe, who has tormented the community of truth seekers for about 50 years. She is a dashing dowager who has talked some of our greatest minds into a state of coma, then left them perfectly satisfied that she had confounded the elders. Madame had studied with every known Swami, yogi, saint, patriarch, and master since the Civil War, and has autographed photographs of the leading religion dispensers of the modern world. They would have given her anything they had to get rid of her. Mrs. Ophelia is a very much present student who can always be found in the front row with her mouth wide open, possibly to show her gold bridgework, going into shivering ecstasies of admiration for some exponent of things divine whom she nearly drives to distraction with an ostrich feather fan or some crinkling note papers. Mrs. Wobbletripe can quote Sanskrit by the yard, can decline Hebrew verbs, and has climbed Mount Shasta, and is the proud owner of a Syriac Bible, which she uses for a paperweight. During the first 15 minutes of her acquaintance, you discover that she has been around the world 14 times, has had several major operations, and has relations married to the most eminent people in the country, with a continuous list of husbands who pass silently to their only rest in the cemetery over the hill. She has a cousin-in-law who owns one of the largest salt licks in Arizona, has been prepared at court without tripping on her train, and has a brother who is an eminent bootlegger. Mrs. Wobbletripe comes from a very excellent family and has a grand niece whose uncle's sister is the wife of Lord Saturday, Knight of the Bath. One of her husbands, now deceased, and who is at rest save when she joins him on the astral plane, made millions in Chinese cues, which he imported for sugar refineries, and her eldest son, by her ninth husband, is married to the daughter of Samoa's bone fertilizer king. All this we get in the first 15 minutes conversation, as I said before. She is subject to hectic delirium, which she believes is a visionary condition, and peculiar feelings come over her occasionally, which she attributes to communication with the masters. but is probably due to the little bubbles of uric acid poisoning which she extracts from her beefsteaks. Madame is a wonderful example of the so-called old students, for it is safe to say that she knows absolutely nothing about anything except her own ideas, which are the center and radius of her life. There's no use talking to the lady because she is completely satisfied with her own gamut of unconsciousness, and knows more than any other person alive, and admits it. If you are in trouble spiritually, she will have some excellent advice for you, which she has never attempted to use herself, but quotes in verbatim from her favorite Swami. She has inflammatory rheumatism, kidney trouble, is very much overweight, won't walk, and spends half her time at Madame Gump's, who is trying to eliminate 7 or 8 of her extra chins painlessly. Kind reader and fellow sufferer, you may not believe that such creatures exist, but they do and can be found anywhere that students of things supernal gather. She will always be found very much in evidence and expresses herself with great confidence upon every conceivable problem. This is an old student. Taking the Funken-Wagnall definition of old, we find that it says in part, things liable to decay or having lived and existed in a certain state for a long time. This particular type has lived in a state of coma for ages and will only come out of it when nature pries her loose. Many students have reached that enviable stage of crystallization when, having found something that to them is perfect, they sit back in complacent mental ossification and bask in the aura of their own accomplishments. We will pass on to Type B, Section X, who is the occult antiquarian and has that wisdom which no one else can get a hold of. He is the chosen of the master's type. Professor Nebuchadnezzar Nibs has studied where no one else can go, but with lofty superiority he condescends to allow others to drink occasionally at the fountain of his divine wisdom. Nebsy is shrouded in credentials of a mystic nature, including a veterinary diploma, and being a member of several secret orders, practices the pass signs every morning so as not to forget them. Neighbors watching him in the morning think he is taking calisthenics, but he is only making the secret sign of the 9th degree of the Sacred Order of Imperial Bunkum. He has been a private pupil of the famous Sylvester Sandstorm, one of Matilda Brainfag's inside group, has studied at the feet of Algernon Spoutley and all the other leading occult luminaries. He will tell you confidentially what they told him confidentially, misquoting leading authorities with the ease and fluency of a practiced liar. He is always surrounded by a number of gushtive individuals carrying light cargoes of mentoids, who found in him the resurrection of a martyr or the reincarnation of a saint and savior within the first 30 days. Professor Nibs admits that he is an old student, also, and he always admits it before anyone else questions him. Everything he does is in a secret and concealed manner. He even thinks in such a carefully hidden way that no other creature could possibly imagine that was what he was doing. Nebsy admits that he is acquainted with all the leading occultists of the world, and recognizes the soul growth in Exhibit A. He has had a very checkered career since he stopped working in the saloon, which career he has perpetuated in a checkered suit. He is willing to share his superior knowledge with humanity for a reasonable consideration, said compensation being as much cash as the other fellow has got. Nebuchadnezzar Nibs talks with the dead every night. He is out of his body half the time and out of his head the other. We sometimes believe that he got lost on the astral plane and forgot to come back. He is surrounded by ethereal creatures and material dupes and a bald head. A wise look and 75 years of stone rolling constitute his stock in trade. He knows absolutely nothing about anything, but conceals this under paternal eyebrows and a saged appearance, which means absolutely nil, and when asked, a quizzer always replies that the information is only given out in the higher grades. Having completed our analysis of Type B, we pass on to Type C, X3, the astrological contortionist and numerological sprainer, Miss Delilah Wampus. No occult group is complete without her, and she is with us even until the end of the world. Her speciality is birth paths and evil aspects. She is perpetually suffering from acute angles and afflictions in her rising sign and can always be found seeking the hour and minute of some individual's birth and then informing them that by compound ratio or mathematical hydraulics that the z squared x means that their husband will run off with the chauffeur's wife, or that their hours are numbered. Ms. Wampus is a specialist at prognostication. She has prophesied every winter that has happened during her lifetime. She knows exactly when the world will end and is waiting patiently for a certain aspect to culminate, for when it does, she is going to do great things. Ms. Wampus is an old maid. She declined 3 aspirants to her hand because their rising sign was not congenial with her own. Her best aspect is Saturn trine Jupiter, and she never misses an opportunity to express these good qualities and to explain that they are the base of her divine understanding. Miss Wampus also sees things occasionally and is now concentrating for prosperity, feeling quite confident that the transit of the moon will assist. She runs her life by astrology, numerology, and kindred sciences and plans out her daily work according to astrological hours. She eats astrology and then, like our family cow, chews it some more. She inhales and exhales sidereal time and has her tea on the table of houses. And whenever she closes her eyes, she sees black horoscope forms. She has been pronounced demented by her relatives because she goes up to perfect strangers on the street and asks them if they have 9 degrees of Taurus in the 8th house. Leaving this specimen in its glass case, we pass on to Exhibit D, one of the most interesting and remarkable examples of old student formation that we have. This particular specie is known as the mouthpiece of the gods. After having passed through 35 or 40 years of indolent probationship, he is now a self-ordained mouthpiece used by the masters of wisdom to sell vacuum cleaners, electric irons, magazine subscriptions, and to dispense the occult wisdom generally. Yes, among our old students we find a large number who are being used by the masters and are in constant communication with the lords of high degree. You will always know them as they sit around discussing the haircut of their favorite patriarch. When we analyze this series of specimens, we feel certain that the only thing which elders could use them for would be scarecrows and danger signals, and there is no doubt that many of our so-called old students in reality are warnings that if we act likewise, we may be as bad as they are. Between Indian guides, masters, and departed swamis, we are raising a wonderful group of old students, whose particular form of insanity leads them to believe that the Lord has singled them out as exceptionally useful instruments, when they have dispositions like the old Nick himself and bodies below the animal standard. I have seen these mouthpieces of the gods tearing hair over the back fence and declaring themselves in ardent language tinged with blue and scarlet sparks of choice profanity. Then, half an hour later, they lead a silent meeting and wish damnation upon their opponents. These old students tell you confidently that they spent the night hobnobbing with the Lord, or that the master so-and-so told them you were to loan them $2.50, or that God told them that the house and lot they want will flutter down from the ethers. We prefer to believe that the old student is demented, than that the lords of reason are capable of such absurdities. They are our demonstrative old students, and their intelligence is just below that of a mineral. Altogether, this quartet of spiritual malformations constitutes quite a percentage of our so-called orthodox atheists. They call themselves old students. No one else will call them that, for fear that they may show up. They have been put out of their homes as nuisances. Most of them have ruined the next 2 or 3 generations through their idiosyncrasies and mental acidities, and now they have spent their time snoozing through religion. Instead of having ripened with age, they have green spots coming on them and are fast-falling victims to the spirit of corrosion. These are our old advanced students. They admit it, they gloat in it, glorify in it, and wallow around in it, never realizing that they are the most perfect specimens of unconscious egotists that disgrace the garlands of our sciences. Will people ever get through with the idea that they know something? Self-satisfaction is the basis of decay, and there are none who know as little as those who think they know a great deal. Socrates said that he was the wisest man in Athens because he was the only man who knew he was a fool. Many an old student has told how much he knew and shown how much he didn't know to one he didn't have sense enough to realize was his superior. The first thing an old student really learns to do is to keep his mouth shut and plod along. Are there any old students? Technically, no. But in this world of affairs, those who have gained the most of practical knowledge have superiority over those who have done nothing. The true old student is known by his deeper understanding of life and its problems and not by the incessant palate calisthenics. The jawbone of Samson's donkey is still slaying as it did of old, and many a suffering mortal has gone with grey hairs to a sorrowful grave, talked to death by one of them. Said bone being vitalized by an old student's motive power. Not 1 in 100 of our so-called old students show any symptoms of spiritual age, but the creaks that we hear when they chew indicates that the organism is dying out and that they are slowly passing into the great beyond, as ignorant of their destiny as before, with nothing to say to the Lord except a quotation from Pythagoras or a couple of Patanjali's aphorisms. It is a very sad thing how little we strive to build for permanence and truth, and how seldom we find one who is really willing to consecrate his soul to the truth, and in silence and simplicity carry on his master's work, whispering his age in the wisdom of his thoughts, the depth of his understanding, and the sweetness of his compassion. Occult fiction. Lord Buddha. He came in a packing box, bound round with bands of steel and iron, dented and battered by its rough usage during a trip of many months. The packing box stood unopened for many weeks before the sacrilegious hands of uninterested servants broke it open and scattered heaps of excelsior and wrapping paper about the floor. At last the figure stood revealed, undoubtedly one of the strangest that had ever crossed the waters from the land of the Blue Lotus. Lord Buddha was a wondrous, life-sized wood carving, and even the servants seemed awed as they gazed upon his gilded form. Many strange stories had come with him from the silent East. It was told that the master himself had breathed the breath of life into the ancient carving, making it sacred to all the children of light. Be that as it may, the Lord Buddha was surely a thing of glory. His robes, carved with wondrous fineness out of ancient teak, were richly covered with solid gold leaf and many-colored lacquers, while his eyes were precious stones set deep into the dark wood which formed the face. Upon his forehead was a mighty diamond, one of the greatest that has ever come out of India. Even the unromantic were forced to stop for a moment and gaze in admiration at the wondrous figure of India's immortal reformer. They took Lord Buddha from the packing case and stood him upon an ebony tabouret in the Gothic library of the Chadwick home, and there he remained shadowed by the gloom of ancient rafters during the weeks and months that passed. Unhonored and unrevered, a breath of the mystic East amid the mold of the prostic West. Lord Chadwick had always had a taste for antiques, and his Indian appointment had given him great opportunities to indulge it. But the main reason why he secured Lord Buddha was because the Hindus did not want him to have it. When you know Lord Chadwick, you know that was reason enough. We will not go into details as to how he acquired the statue, for he followed a rather, shall we say, irregular manner, not unusual among foreigners in the Orient. The Christian seldom asks the heathen for anything he wants, but just takes it. If the native protests, the Christian shoots him. So with great expense and labor, Lord Buddha was sent to London, where he remained in silent meditation, surrounded by cobwebs and the curse of an outraged priestcraft. A brief description of Lord Chadwick may not be out of place at this moment. He was one of those particularly affable gentlemen who is always a leading attraction among the ladies and a source of great inspiration to all who do not know him too well. While admitting his affability and his military polish, it is necessary, for the proper unfolding of our story, that we unveil certain parts of his private life which are of a slightly different flavor. Poor Lady Chadwick had been dragged through a knothole and then stepped on in the course of being duly impressed by her husband's personal omnipotence, and a strange pathetic expression appeared in her bleary-eyed eyes every time anyone congratulated her upon her choice of a husband. Not that the Earl was a tyrant or anything of that kind, just that a certain besetting sin went with the heraldry of his house. When the Earl was sober, he was a gentleman, but after a few hours at the club he became infinitely inferior to a self-respecting animal. Every time his lordship fell victim to his indiscretion, a reign of terror descended upon the household, and suffering and misery formed the family lot. Not always, just when Lord Chadwick was exercising his hereditary sins. It is a strange thing how temperaments become reversed under the influence of alcoholic stimulant, for Lord Chadwick sober and Lord Chadwick intoxicated were two entirely different beings, like the old story of Jekyll and Hyde. This is not a story, however, of family skeletons, but it is a narrative wound round Lord Buddha, who stood, through all these passing months, on his lotus throne in the silent shades of the library, his hands clasped in meditation and his flowing robe gleaming in the half-light. A certain cold December evening had given way to the bleakness of a moonless night. Lady Chadwick stood before the fire in the library, her eyes fixed on the great clock hanging on the wall, whose silent fingers were passing slowly round the ancient dial. A great fear oppressed her, for Lord Chadwick and several of his cronies at the club had taken steps earlier in the evening which usually preceded one of Milord's streaks of intemperance. This part of our story deals with the ancient fable of the worm who turned. Lady Chadwick, inspired by the flaring embers of a dying will, had decided that from now on her husband would have to find within the heraldry of his house some symptom of inherited courtesy and restraint. Reared in obedience, married off in perfect obedience, beaten to further increase said obedience, Milady was about to commit Europe's most terrible sin. An expression of individuality, an unpermissible thing among the blue blood of the old country. It was about 3:30 when a cab pulled up at the door, and two voices broke the stillness, whose tones were about as thick as the average London night. "5 bob," called a voice. "You heard me, 5 bob, not a farthing less." "Stoomish," sounded a muffled growl. "I won't pay it. 5 bob, you blighty, 5 bob." Then there came a sound of a blow. The voice of the hackman broke forth, this time as pure Cockney, his language consisting of one malediction after another. "Help, help, he's strangling me." "Shut up," threatened a thick voice. "Take thash and thash." At the same time there was the sound of 2 heavy thuds, followed by a low groan. Then unsteady steps on the pavement and a grating noise as Milord tried to fit his key into the door hinge. "She won't fit, shit, she won't fit," he muttered. "Shmush, be the wrong key. Well, I'll fix it." The next instant there was a crash as Lord Chadwick kicked his foot through the plate glass door piece and unlatched the portal from the inside. There was the sound of steps advancing at a right oblique, and as Lady Chadwick faced the library door, the form of her better half appeared in all the dignity of inebriate nobility. Lord Chadwick was a tall, broad-shouldered man, heavily tanned by exposure to the eastern suns and with the muscles of an ox. He now stood swaying slightly on patent leather hinges, his tall silk hat over one eye and his evening cape dangling along the ground on the end of his cane. Putting a white-gloved hand over his mouth, he hiccuped gently behind him. "Well, what's you looking at?" Without a word, Lady Chadwick turned and, with tears in her eyes, faced the great open fireplace on the opposite side of the room. "What's matter?" demanded the nobleman as he reached out and hung his hat on an imaginary hook about 6 feet in the air. "Why don't you speak to me?" "John Chadwick, you are drunk again," exclaimed his wife, turning around. "You don't hash to tell me. I know it. Hash such wonderful time." And me lord swallowed hard. "But what has that got to do with it? Why don't you come over and say good morning?" His wife remained silent and turned again with her back to her husband. "Well, why don't you answer? Don't you know I'm your husband?" Still no sound from Lady Chadwick. A strange expression slowly came into the eyes of Lord Chadwick. He straightened up, and his face grew hard. "Come here," he demanded. Still his wife never moved. "I told you to come here. When I want anyone in this house, they have to come. If you don't come right over, I'll throw this at your head." And he picked up a large china vase. Lady Chadwick remained as before, and without further warning, her husband threw the china jar with all his might across the room. But he staggered as it left his hand, and it missed her by several feet. "You brute!" exclaimed his wife as the vase crashed into a great Venetian plate glass, sending fragments in all directions. Then the thing which all his family feared happened. The spirit of ages of degeneracy and debauchery possessed him. Lord Chadwick's body slowly bent forward, and his head sank on his chest between his great arms, which swung like those of a monster ape. His lips drew back from his teeth, and the white of his eyes grew red and streaked. The parlor gentleman had become the domestic beast. With a scream, his wife shrank back as the figure slowly advanced, his steps no longer unsteady, but now like the stealthy tread of an animal. Reaching a great chair, the Earl picked it up with the ease of a giant and hurled it across the room, where it struck the old stone wall and was splintered to bits by the force of the blow. His wife, terrified beyond expression, crept slowly back into the corner of the room, while ever closer loomed the form of her husband, now blinded with drunken rage. At last the corner was reached, and further retreat was impossible. She had stopped beside the figure of Lord Buddha, who stood in silent contemplation, unmoved by the scene of confusion around him. As she shrank back, her shoulder touched his lacquered robe, and the chill caused her to draw aside. Suddenly, crouching like an animal, Lord Chadwick sprang at the trembling figure of his wife, and with a cry of terror she jumped behind the statue of Lord Buddha. With an implication, Chadwick rushed against the statue, throwing his arms around it to cast it aside. But though he pulled and tugged, the figure of the Oriental demigod would not move. It seemed rooted to the ground. As he tried to pass around it, it seemed that the robes spread out on each side, and before the Earl realized it, he found himself twisted and bound in what seemed folds of golden lacquer. Struggling, twisting, and roaring like an angry bull, he sought to escape from the statue. His wife watched in amazement, for she saw her husband's hands and arms apparently growing to the form which he tugged and tore to escape from. Slowly the minutes passed. Lord Chadwick's struggles became less and less until, finally exhausted and enveloped in folds of yellow lacquer, he fell at the feet of the statue, his hands and arms still glued to its surface. The Earl was now thoroughly sober. The terror of his position, held prisoner by a force unknown, took all the hate out of his being. "How am I going to get free?" he kept muttering and turning with pleading eyes to his wife. She, realizing that the fit of passion was gone, attempted to release him. But his hands seemed part of the statue, and as she watched, Lady Chadwick gave a scream of amazement and terror. The fingers and hands of the Earl were slowly becoming encrusted with a golden film. At the point where he grasped the statue, they had become like the teak wood beneath them. In other words, he was turning into an idol himself under the mysterious power of the sacred form of Lord Buddha. As his wife stood there in perplexity, she heard footsteps behind her, and turning, she looked into the faces of 3 men, all of them Orientals. They must have entered through the broken doorway. "Who are you?" she demanded, starting back. One of them bowed politely and spoke in perfect English. "Our names will do you very little good, madame, but we have come all the way from the sacred shrine in India to take Lord Buddha back to his home." Lady Chadwick immediately replied, Yes, take the statue, gladly. "But how can I release my husband, for his hands and arms are turning into lacquer?" The priest shook his head. "That is the curse of Lord Buddha upon those who defile his sanctity." "Is there nothing that can be done that I may escape?" pleaded Lord Chadwick. There's no way but through prayers to Lord Buddha, for he is the Lord of righteousness, and if it pleases him, he may release you from his golden self. If not, you must await the end. I will give anything that I have to be released. My arms are growing cold, and a creeping death is upon me," cried the nobleman. Suddenly, a strange thing happened. The mouth of the Buddha opened, and a voice seemed to breathe out from the soul of the statue. "I am Lord Buddha. Ages ago I breathed myself into this thing of wood carved by the hands of the faithful. You stole me from my shrine, but that sin was not your greatest. Know you that those who seek protection behind the yellow robe of the Buddha shall not seek in vain. No man shall pass this gleaming robe for works of hate. I'm going back again to my people who love me, honor me, and revere me. But before I go, I grant you life on one condition, that never again shall you abuse it, and if you do, as surely as I stand here today, you shall become a figure of wood and stone." Slowly the hands of Lord Chadwick fell from the statue, and the folds of lacquer seemed to swing and sway in the breeze that came through the open door. The statue then stepped down from its pedestal, and as the three Orientals fell on their knees before it, passed slowly out of the door, draped in its blowing robes of gold. On the ground, as it passed, were left strange footmarks pressed into the very surface of the floor. Without a word, the three Orientals followed the carven figure, and Lord Chadwick suddenly swayed with dizziness and fell across the pedestal to the floor. My lord suddenly sat up in his chair and gazed around him. The London Times fell from between his fingers, and he slowly drew in one foot, whose close proximity to the fireplace was undoubtedly the cause of his sudden awakening. He turned to his wife, who was sitting, reading, a few feet away. "How long have I been asleep?" "About an hour and a half, dear," she answered meekly. "By Jove, the most peculiar dream. You know you have often asked me to stop drinking. I have half a mind to do it. By the way, I dreamed that my statue of Buddha came to life and walked off. Wasn't that unusual? I must go over and look at him again. He is the most..." Lord Chadwick had stopped and was staring at the recess in the wall where Lord Buddha had stood. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. "Good Lord, it's gone." "Really?" exclaimed Lady Chadwick mildly. "Are you sure you haven't mislaid it, my dear?" "Do you know," announced his lordship, "I believe I will stop drinking." Suddenly his face brightened up. "I see it all now," he muttered. "They told me that they would get it back. They are a strange people, those Orientals." "If you think they are strange, they must be strange, my dear," remarked his well-regulated wife eagerly. My lord sat down again with his feet on the grating. "I haven't lived in India for 20 years without seeing something of Oriental magic. That dream of mine was more than a dream. It was Oriental magic. They have spirited the statue away." "I wish the spirits would wipe their shoes when they come in," murmured Lady Chadwick. "Look at those footprints all the way to the door." The Earl gazed at them. His mind turned to the shrines of India, and a strange expression came into his face. "What are those things?" asked his wife. "Will you please tell me, dear?" "They are the footprints of Lord Buddha," answered the nobleman. "What are they, John? You know I always let you do my heavy thinking for me." "I don't understand it myself very well," answered my lord as he stroked his chin reflectively. "But there goes the dinner bell, and I must be at the club this evening, so you had better come, my dear." Occult Fiction. The Lord of the Flaming Mountain. Up from the shadows of swaying palms and jungle underbrush, a little group of pilgrims wound their way in and out among the broken lava rocks and stubble towards a mighty mountain that rose as a looming mystery to touch the deep blue of the tropic sky. From the top of this peak, a thin trail of smoke poured eternally, as though in truth this mystery of nature were the vent of Vulcan's forge. A strange group indeed it was that climbed up and up along the narrow path that led to the distant heights. They were a people we see no longer, for already eternities have shrouded them in the mantle of forgetfulness. First came a tall and aged man. His copper skin seamed and wrinkled, but his face strong and resolute. He was robed in a cape woven of birds' feathers, and tilted forward upon his head was a strange peaked cap, from the point of which hung a pendant of gold and jewels, which tossed and swayed as he walked. On his forehead was a cross traced in white pigments, while the breeze blowing aside his cape disclosed the fact that his only other garment was a girdle of golden plates, set with amethysts and rubies. In the center of the girdle was a strange face molded of solid gold, a face surrounded by a halo of flames, in whose eyes sparkled rubies of a never-ending radiance. In one hand, the aged man carried a carved staff painted in many colors, and in the other a rattle hanging upon a tassel of human hair, and composed of a gourd contained within its dried husk a tiny pebble. The long hair of the man was gray and hung in many plaits upon his shoulders, while his beard, braided like the Assyrians, hung halfway to his waist. He was the priest of the divine Lord, master of the great fire, whose temple stood alone among the lava banks and ashes of the flaming mountain. The second member of the party was a young girl some 16 or 18 years of age. She too wore a cape of bird feathers, and upon her small feet were sandals inlaid with jewels. Her head was uncovered, revealing braided hair which hung in 2 long coils nearly to her knees, and was of the shiny blackness of the lava rocks that surrounded her. She was covered with golden ornaments and chains, while her arms and ankles were encircled by bands of gold connected with links of silver and copper. But though adorned with the ransom of emperors, she seemed more captive in bondage, for her ornaments were like shackles and clanked dismally as she walked along. 2 other figures completed this group. Powerful men they were, whose brown bodies glistened in the sunshine and whose forms and proportions were those of Greek athletes. They wore neither cape nor headdress, but their bodies were adorned with golden bangles, and strange animals were tattooed in many colors upon their skins. The heavy girdles they wore were weighted with plates of gold, and each carried in his hand a feathered staff surmounted by a globe of fiery gold. The 4 figures wound in and out among the rocks, and as they neared the top of the lofty mountain, thin streams of smoke rose up from the crevices at their feet. The air was filled with a moaning and rumbling. The earth shook and shivered like a thing alive. The heavy fumes of sulphurous smoke creeping up shrouded the little band in a semi-darkness, while the sun shone as a ball of angry red behind clouds of swirling ashes. Evening was falling before they neared the summit, and as the sun sank to rest, a strange lurid glow thrilled through the atmosphere. An eerie, ever-changing radiance reflected in a million different ways from the clouds of mist and vapor. Still, the little band climbed upward and upward, ever nearer to the mighty crater that loomed like a gaping pit of hell before them. Suddenly, they reached a great rock, and passing around its side, were confronted by a tiny hut built of stones and lava, shielded by the projecting side of the cliffs, but half concealed by the seething vapors of the volcano. Reaching the door of the hut, the old priest raised his staff, while the other 3 fell to their knees. Behold, this is the temple of anguish built on the crest of Chitoka, the mountain of undying fires. This is the place of wailing where we sinful mortals come to ask forgiveness of our Lord and Master. For behold, our God speaks to us through the mountain of fire. Many days now has his voice been heard, and the roaring and rumblings have whispered of his wrath. He has said to his priests, "Bring from the people of earth a living sacrifice unto me in the mountains of my fires." And we have brought one, even as he has said. For behold, we have chosen from among our nation the loveliest and purest daughter of the earth, and brought her up this mountain to be the bride of the Fire King. He rose and entered the little hut, and a fire, kindled with a broken stick, flared up, its ruddy glows revealing a massive altar, above which a great flaming face looked down, a face of gold and jewels from which poured forth streamers and rays of living light. O Spirit of fire, thy children obey thy call. For it was said of thee by our fathers' fathers, that when thou criest out for vengeance for the forgetfulness of men, behold, there must be one of the people who shall climb to the heights of thy lofty shrine and die, that they children may be saved. For thine own voice has spoken, saying there shall be one acceptable in the sight of our God, who shall come to make offer of their life unto our God on Chitoka, the sacred mountain, and only the pure in heart are acceptable as a sacrifice unto thee. Come, O Lord of the sacred mountain, and take unto thyself this one of our people who comes forth to sacrifice herself, that thy wrath may not descend upon the world. The flaming face gleamed and glowed in the flickering light, its eyes seeming to shine with a fire demoniacal. The old priest bowed, and no sound broke the stillness except a broken sob from the prisoner in her golden chains. Slowly the old priest left the little hut, and, followed by the others, climbed up and over the side of the volcano, finally standing at the very peak of a great rock that jutted over the sea of molten lava. In the center rose a mighty cone, and from it flames and sulfur came up in never-ending steam. A great rumbling and roaring rent the heavy stillness of the island night, and the splashing of lava bubbles in the sea of molten rock beneath sounded like sobs on the air. All the figures were tinged red with the flames, and standing alone on that pinnacle of rock in their robes of feathers and girdles of gold, they seemed like fiery spirits of the dawn when creation was in the making instead of living creatures in a world of flesh. The old priest raised his hands and cried outward over the lake of flames. We have come, O Master, as thy law has demanded. We have brought thee thy bride. Accept our sacrifice, O fiery one, and destroy not our people. Send not thy flaming rivers to burn our homes with consuming fire. Send not the messengers of death, the ashes and the plagues. Rock not the earth with thy vengeance, O God of fire. But accept this, the best we have to offer thee. He knelt upon the rock, and the rumblings and roarings seemed to deepen while great clouds of flame and smoke rose from the volcano's depthless center, and the rocks beneath their feet shook and quivered with a life divine. Slowly the slender figure of the girl arose and with calm courage crossed the narrow shelf of stone. Dropping aside the robe of bird's feathers, she stood poised upon the point of rock, beneath her the surging sea of molten lava. The flames sparkled on the jewels that she wore, for these too were to be cast with her into the yawning mouth of the fire god. Suddenly, as she stood there, there arose from the depths of the mountain a great streaming cloud of many-colored mists. It twinkled, swayed, and twisted like a thing alive, and instead of passing onward and outward into the heavens, it hovered and floated over the center of the crater. Slowly the streaming lights took form. The many changing vapors gathered themselves together until a mighty being hovered over Chitoka. The priest raised his hands in awe, and trembling and shrank backward on the rock, while the two that were with him moaned and groaned in fear and agony. But the thin figure still stood alone on the point of rock, her copper skin gleaming and glowing from the flickering flames of the volcano. The great mystery shadow shape became clear as the moments passed, and the Great One hovered closely over the volcano. A creature composed of the very flames themselves, his hair a mass of flowing sparks, his fingers tapering off into points of flame, his robes of crimson fire trailing off into the mist and vapor of the volcano. Great wings of flame and fire poured from him, and his eyes shone like the molten lava of the crater. A thundering voice spoke as the great creature swept over the surface of his volcano towards the pinnacle of rocks. Behold, I am angered at thee, thou puny children of men. It is well that ye have brought your sacrifice to the top of the mountain, for ye have displeased the spirit of the fires. What boon ask you in exchange for the bride that ye have brought me? O Lord of the flaming mountain, cried the priest. For many days have the ashes poured upon our villages. For many nights has the dull glow of your anger brought terror to our hearts. We come to thee, O Lord, asking peace, and that ye shall not destroy us with the flames of thy wrath. O King of the salamanders, son of the fiery sparks of Fohat, accept this the purest gift of earth and freest from thy hate. The lord of the volcano had reached the mighty cliff that edged his crater and reached out his arms of streaming flame to grasp in them the slender figure that stood upon the rock. Ye have brought your sacrifice, O children of men, but know you not that you yourselves are the spirits of fire? For many weeks and many years ye have wrangled and fought and hated in your villages, and for that ye have brought upon yourselves the curse of the Lord of Flames. For behold, to my mountain come the hates and griefs and wranglings of the people, and from them are built the flames of my lofty peak. And were it not that ye battled in your villages, my flames could not battle on this mountain peak. Ye sue for peace, but that I cannot give you, while to this crater come the flames of hate. The mumblings and the rumblings which ye hear are but shadows of your own hearts, the seething cauldrons of flames but whisper of the flames of passion within your own soul. I am the Lord of the Flames. I am the Regent of the Red World. I am the voice of the eternal fire. I love the children of men, and being strong in fire, I would serve them. But they have taken my fire and desecrated it, and as it seethes and boils within their own souls, so the shadows rise upon my mountain. Go back to your village and say unto them that the Lord of the Flaming Mountain has spoken, saying that only when the souls of men are at rest will my mountain slumber. Behold, thy sacrifice is acceptable in my sight. The heart of one that is pure can soothe the flames of creation. It is said of the gods that through all the ages some must perish, that many may be saved. Go ye now your way, and I shall return to the heart of the flaming mountain, taking with me the sacrifice that ye have made. Be not this sacrifice in vain, for it is not the first, nor shall it be the last. Many a soul has perished to save the world from my wrath. Many a courageous one has entered my flames that the world should have peace. But the Lord of the Flaming Mountain is not unkind. Fear not for the one that ye have given, nor fear ye for the sacrifice of your people. But come unto me with love, and my flames shall warm their hearts. Slowly the fiery figure gathered the form in its arms, and floating out over the volcano passed slowly downward into its mighty center, clasping to itself the jeweled figure of the girl. A great peace descended upon the mountain. The flames of smoke died out, and the lava ceased to flow. The rumblings grew less and less until at last silence ruled supreme. The old priest rose and was turning away when a mighty voice spoke from the depths of the earth. I, the Lord of the Flaming Mountain, am at rest. A noble soul has sacrificed itself to bring me peace. In all the ages of the world I have gathered unto myself many, but they are not mine. For behold, the daughter of earth is not with me in my fiery mountain, but with her God and my God. And behold, she has passed through the flaming ring unscarred, and in her great desire has redeemed not only you, but herself also. Go ye unto your people, and let not this sacrifice be in vain. Remember that only when ye learn to love one another shall my mountain be at rest. For when ye wrangle in discord among yourselves, ye loose my flames and turn them on the worlds of men. Then my mountain cries out for vengeance, and the sword of death is loosened as the thunder and lightning of the gods. Once more art ye forgiven. Go and do better. Remember who was your answer, and let not the martyr die in vain. The Lord of the Flaming Mountain is not dead, but rests in peace under the spell of redemption. Wake him not with hate and lust, for once awake he will never sleep until another be found to pacify him. Send no more brides to the top of my mountain, but live in your villages in peace as the most acceptable sacrifice unto my eyes. Fear me, for I am great. Obey me, for I am kind. Redeem me, for I am salvation. And though my temple is on my mountain, rather let it be in the soul of man. While there is one that is pure, I will rest, lulled to peace by their love. But if ye live not one unto the other in friendship and in charity, ye shall hear my voice again, and the world shall know me, and cry out in agony unto the Lord of the Flaming Mountain. But I can do nothing but use the flames which thou hast given me. Send special articles, faded flowers, Oftentimes, in wandering through an old home among the scenes of long ago, one finds pressed away in a favorite volume, possibly the Bible or the family album, a faded rose crushed between the leaves. After many years of forgetfulness, it will bring back memories of the past, some loved one nearly forgotten in the battle of life, some dear soul we used to know comes before the mirror of the mind. We hear a laughing voice, perhaps now hushed forever, and kind hands stretch across the years to enfold us again in memory's embrace. How few of these faded flowers have a message to the world, yet each whispers something of the past to some responsive heart. And how much like faded flowers are the hearts of suffering men and women wandering through life. Each faded rose was once the fairest blossom, and in a distant day forgotten its dried and falling petals shone forth with all its glory of nature and its God. As we go along the road of life, we see many wondrous blossoms filling the air with glorious fragrance and exquisite color. But when we pass that way again, we see them faded and returning again to the dust from whence they came. How like the faded flower is the life of man. The glowing ideals he came here to carry out he soon forgets. His dreams of glorifying the world vanish from his memory as he struggles through the sordidness of life. In truth, he cometh forth as a flower and is cut down. But beneath the wilted petals and beneath that broken heart of a man there still glows in embers a light eternal. And some day the great magician is going to wander along that dusty road and with the touch of his magic wand bring back to life to these faded flowers. In the highways and byways of this world, who shall be this great magician? Who shall play the fairy queen and raise to life again the dead? There is within each one of us the great magician, the good spirit, who can bring faded flowers to life and restore the broken blossoms from whole crushed petals. Have been formed a rosary that ends with a cross. There is this wondrous fairy godmother who can bring to life the dead rose and make it bloom again in radiant beauty. And this mystic being, the good fairy, is the sweetness and compassion of love and hope that is hidden deep in the heart of every man. Each kind word, each sweet thought brings forth again the glow of life to the soul of some faded flower. It is a glorious thing to have the power to make the world shine again with happiness. This is within the reach of every mystic, for into the hands of one who has earned this right to bring back the blush of life to broken souls, a great privilege is given. No longer does he live for what the world can give him, for he has more than it can ever know. He lives to wander through the gardens of humanity where flower and blooming shrub fade each year as the snows of winter come. Gathering up the dried and withered leaves, he blesses them with the power of life that they brighten up again at his touch. Where the mystic is, there can be no faded flowers, for he lives only to bring joy and life into the world. Hates and fears, sorrows and remorse, all these have withered the flowers of life. The roses of youth vanish from the cheek as the furrows of care appear, and the eyes once bright with laughter soon grow dull with weeping. But the work of the master is to bring back the old-time joy, and although his own heart be sad, he smiles serenely through his tears as he gathers the broken petals to mold them again into perfect flowers. And man is walking in the footsteps of this master. Every day, somewhere, he sees a withered rose whose petals would glow again if he would but nourish them with the waters of life. Just a kind word, and the flower will become a thing of beauty in the garden of the Lord. We are to go forth in the name of the Father and gather close to our hearts these withered flowers, the broken children of men. In love and compassion we are to serve them, in humility and simplicity to protect them, in sympathy and brotherhood to assist them, that the spirit of joy may come again into their lives as the blossoming of a flower. Somewhere in the soul of man, no matter how cold he may seem, there is something which cries out to smile, cries out to be happy, and being happy cries some more. This is a certain soul quality, explainable and known only to those who have suffered, and yet through it all are drawn by bonds undefinable back to the cause of their anguish. There is something very human about the world, and while it may seem a cruel place, the longer we are in it, the less we desire to leave it. It is so much like each one of us that the bonds of understanding make us love the old earth more and more. The glory of being alive is a wonderful thing, but the still greater glory of giving life and expression to others fills the heart with a real purpose of being. And he who turns back again into the garden of the earth to nurture and care for those withered flowers, whose drooping petals bespeak the dying courage of an unawakened life, knows no other joy. It is a wondrous thing to feel that it is within our power, if we live as we should, to give these flowers new duty. From the soul of him who thus redeems the rose that was withered shall shine forth a star through the darkness, that star which is the mark of the compassionate one. The sons of God labor eternally with man to build within him that sweet sadness, the sadness which is the great peace that surpasseth understanding. In simple symbol, well known to our eyes, the Son of Compassion will ever seek to teach us the way that we should go, seeking to build within us the realization of the path which they have walked. They never command us to go this way or that. They only show us the beauties of the path. They show us the faded flowers, and then they ask if there can be anything more beautiful in all the world than a flower turned upward in adoration to the light of its God. They ask if anything is sadder than to see the blossom wither and fade away. Then it is shown to us that we may go forth and bring to blossom the flower of spirit, now budding alone in the endless deserts of materiality. So let us take their symbol of service and go out to labor in the world fields, that the faded flower hidden within the heart of man, called the Spirit of Christ, shall be raised from the dead to blossom forth unto perfect life. Man is the little creator made in the image of the great Creator, containing in possibility all that God has in awakened energy. Oriental Occultism, the Night of Brahma. At the end of every cosmic cycle of action, there follows a period of rest, and this is the ebb and flow of energy, which marks one of the fundamental expressions of the eternal plan. The periods of activity are called the days of Brahma, when the world outpouring itself from the unknown expresses its energized and rejuvenated qualities, and with greater courage, power, and speed carries on the work of universal unfoldment because of the periods of rest. At the end of each day of manifestation, the universe, the sun of necessity, is dissolved or swallowed up in cosmic night, which was called by the ancients pralaya. For every action in this world, which implies the expending of energy, there must ensue a period of inaction, during which time nature rebuilds the tissues and revivifies the bodies torn down and scattered by the activities of mental, physical, or spiritual expression. There is no one who can entirely set aside the periods of rest, and while for many years, lives perhaps, a powerfully constituted organism may sustain itself upon comparatively little relaxation, still at some time or other even the gods must pass into cosmic or universal sleep. Death is merely an expression of the return of bodies to sleep. Paul says we die daily, and this is a spiritual truth, for each day we tear down the body cells and life forces which are forced to expend in our manifestation and growth here. During the periods of cosmic sleep, the universe rebuilds its shattered vehicles, and when they return to life, they start with a great impetus, similar to the buoyancy we feel when we awaken from peaceful slumber. When we do not feel refreshed from sleep, it is a certainty that the vehicles have not been relaxed, and that through unwise eating or physical derangement, the spiritual consciousness has not completely separated itself from its vehicle of expression. The withdrawal of the life from the form constitutes death. The temporary withdrawal without rupturing the connecting links between bodies is called sleep. And this is the period of physical regeneration, for night is illuminated by the moon, the generator of bodies, and the ruling principle of those vitalizing forces which rebuild the depleted tissue of vehicles, under the direction of the elemental intelligences. Brahma, the incarnated intelligence of the universe, is called the Grand Man, and he is supposed to be endowed with the qualities of man in a grander and more perfect degree. The sleeping and waking, the birth and death of Brahma is correlated to the shorter periods of manifestation of man, and the analogy is quite perfect. One of the greatest works that confronts the student is to accurately learn to understand the use and application of the powers of relaxation. The continued overexertion of a body, a brain center, or an organ of consciousness will shorten the length of its life. It is true that all parts of man grow stronger with exercise, but exercise must be balanced by rest, for exercise tears down the walls of resistance and saps the stores of energy used to give expression to a body or organ. Therefore, a certain part of the time we must allow certain centers to rest and recuperate from our unbalanced use of them. The child in school tires of arithmetic in an hour or so, and then you transfer his attention to spelling or geography, bringing into play an entirely different series of sense centers. This results in the relaxation of the tired organ, during which time the mind recuperates from the strain placed upon it and prepares for further active expression. The 43 faculties of the human brain must all be given alternately exercise and rest, the result being a well-balanced consciousness and an adaptable mind. The mental breakdown is the result of abuse of a single faculty or trying to make an organ run both night and day, year in and year out without rest. There are two grand phases of force. One is that expression which pours into the reservoir to supply the needs of expression. The other is that which pours out of the reservoir in active manifestation. Nothing can come out of man that has not already gone in, for he has not yet acquired the miraculous picture of the gods. He can go no further than the energy stored in the reservoir. He can be no stronger than the involuted energies which he radiates. Therefore, the involution of power is absolutely necessary to the evolution of form. These two laws are interdependent upon one another, for man cannot pour into his organism safely energy unless he expends a certain amount in his daily life. If he does not do this, he runs over. On the other hand, the amount within measures his capacity to draw forth. Man involutes the expressions of this force in his material and spiritual thoughts, actions, and desires. All life is an ebb and flow of energies. These energies pour into man from the planes of consciousness, to which he has attuned himself through his own works and thoughts. They can produce no higher results than the plane of consciousness from whence they came, and the quality of inflowing energy is limited by the vehicles of attraction, which gather it from the cosmos. The problem of the days and nights of Brahma is to man a divine allegory, expressing as it does the requirements of his own life. Two forces govern man, solar and lunar. The solar govern the higher man, the lunar the bodies. Each of these must alternately be given opportunity for self-expression, in order that they may carry on their respective duties. So at night, while the body is undisturbed by conscious mental or physical reaction, the repertory powers of nature take charge of the organism and prepare it to support and express the life within it during the following period of action. In the daytime, the spiritual consciousness is ushered into its vehicle, where its own growth is carried on at the expense of the lower bodies. The result is a divine balance of the periods of recuperation and destruction. Wise and careful seekers after things spiritual have learned to recognize the vital importance of giving their bodies and centers of consciousness the proper amount of exercise and relaxation. All of man's bodies have a great similarity. Our minds and emotions are subject to the same general ailments, before which the physical body must bow, and all through nature the law of action and repose is a governing factor. Man, in his haste, fails to properly consider and study the law of periodicity. Consequently, he must pay the price in broken health and inefficiency. Those who would be like God in dynamic powers must develop their organism in accordance with his laws, which are the individualized needs of his composite progression. So through the ages, the days and nights of Brahma go on. Worlds come in and worlds go out, and in shorter periods of time, man passes through similar conditions, which to him seem very terrible, but which in reality are his greatest blessings. For God does not die when his vehicles are asleep. He is functioning in other worlds, in finer and more sensitive bodies. And it is only the exhausted appendage of consciousness that is dropped and its centers allowed to rest. While in higher and finer worlds, the consciousness is making further plans for its unfoldment and final union with the form which now it is forced to vampirize in order to exist during the days of Brahma. Mystic Masonry. The triangle on the Mason's ring. All created things express themselves through a trinity as the Yod, the eternal flame, manifests through the triangle of differentiation. The triangle is used in practically all the mystery schools, representing the three outpourings of the unmanifest. The triple scepter and the threefold crown also symbolize the same general principles. Radiating out from man, the equilateral triangle symbolizes first side, mastery of the celestial world, heaven. Second side, mastery of the material world, earth. Third side, mastery of the demoniacal world, hell. Taking the three general divisions of heaven, earth, and hell, as they are played out in nature, we find them symbolical in the religious and philosophies of the world of the following principles. Three columns, heaven, the superior, earth, balanced, and hell, the inferior. Three columns, above, center, below. God, man, demon. Spirit, mind, matter. Sulfur, mercury, salt. Brain, heart, procreative system. Fire, earth, water. Altruism, balance, egotism. To be raised, equilibrium, and to be lowered. Light, fire, mist, darkness. East, south, west. Vitalization, vitalized matter, crystallization. Oxygenation, blending, carbonization. Regeneration, generation, degeneration. Light, shade, darkness. Thought, heart, sentiments, the strength of hand. The great triangle of human existence consists of the powers that bring in, the powers which preserve, and the forces which take out. These three form the trinity of religious thought and have been personified as three phases of the Godhead, namely, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Creator, the Preserver, the Destroyer, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Odin, Balder, Thor, blue, yellow, red. These three are the expressions of God, whose color is indigo and who manifests in this world through his three witnesses, which we know as the triangle. To a Mason, the triangle is symbolical of balance. It teaches him that as a student of the mystic and the occult, it is his duty to balance and harmonize all of these series of extremes, each one of which is dependent upon the others. All opposites are dependent upon the other for existence, and the initiate is one who has blended and unified all diversity. These three sides of the triangle represent the three kings of the Masonic temple glorifying their God, but they also become murderers and prison walls when they are perverted through human ignorance and the animal tendencies. Occult Masonry, the triangle on the Mason's ring, continued from the May issue. In the first issue of our magazine, we started an article on the symbolism of the triangle, especially the flaming triangle, as it is understood in the inner Masonic lodges and mystic centers of spiritual knowledge. The three sides of the triangle represent, of course, the three outpourings of life and energy which are molding the threefold body of man. The triangle is composed of two substances and is shown in two ways. The upright triangle is white, symbolizing the up-pointing spiritual tendencies of man, the turning Godward of the three human expressions of thought, emotion, and form, while the triangle with the point downward is symbolical of the three spiritual flames descending downward from the heavens to impregnate and vitalize man. These two with their points together form an hourglass, which is the ancient symbol of time well known to Masons. There are two flames in the universe, the golden flame and the black flame. The golden fire belongs to heaven and the realms of truth and light, while the black flame belongs to oblivion, the home of eternal darkness. The degenerate individual is symbolized by the black flame, while the regenerated individual is typified by the golden up-pointing fire. The yod, or dot, in the triangle represents God, who is only known or cognized through the expression of the triangle. He is the life within or behind the glass of manifestation and the unformed. Unexpressed energy manifests through the three witnesses of air, fire, and water, earth. God manifests only through his creations. When he wishes to send us a great truth needed for our development, he expresses it through the triangle of spirit, mind, and body. Spirituality is a child born of three parents: a clean body, a pure heart, and a balanced mind. This child must be nurtured and cared for as any physical baby. From this guarding and care is born the soul, which shines forth as a great aura of light and is symbolized by the glow which surrounds the Masonic triangle. Of all the ancient and honored religious doctrines, there are none as old as the worship of the flame. From the most ancient of times down to our modern days, the great unknown, the spiritual power of the universe, has been loved, protected, and revered by mankind and called the eternal flame. The ancients used as a symbol of this flame the upright triangle, which precedes the G as the sacred symbol of Masonry. In Greek, God is Deus, and the first letter D is made in the form of an upright triangle. This upright triangle signifies the awakening of God within man as a wonderful threefold flame, which divides itself through the nourishing of the three bodies. It is the 33rd degree symbol of the Masonic order, which, surrounded with its glowing flame, stands for the God consciousness in man. The flaming triangle is made of three absolutely equal angles and symbolizes the divine balance in the threefold constitution. The balancing of his three bodies and their uniting to express a single central power is the basis of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, and is the end to which all Masons aspire. The salt, sulfur, and mercury of the ancients is a divine allegory used to conceal the secret of the philosopher's stone, which is nothing more or less than the union of spirit, mind, and body. The endless symbol of the human ultimate. The realization of this great truth is the beginning of true wisdom. 33rd degree Masons are evolved, not ordained, and their ordination in the spiritual things is the result of having lived the mystic truths of the Masonic life. Without this, no true spirituality is possible. When the God in man, the flaming center of the triangle, is capable of expressing itself through three perfect instruments, built by man and dedicated by the lower upon the altar of the divine, then can God find the perfect expression, and the Mason himself becomes the flaming triangle, surrounded by the glowing garments of his living soul. The triangle is truly a wonderful symbol, and as the Mason carries it upon the ring he wears, let him realize that its eternal plea is for the balancing of the threefold constitution, united in the expression of a single divinity.